Yo, hello and welcome. It's Mefjus here, Particles, Studio Insight. This time we're gonna have a look into the track Out of Time I did with Break. It's now out on Vision Recordings. Let's jump right in. For this track, Charlie, Break and I, we were trying to not go too far out with, with modern effects and synthetic sounds. The idea was that we use a lot of samples for this one. So the whole processing of the bass sounds is really, really different this time. If you compare it with Transit or Bubble, for instance. Let's have a look, as always, at the drums. Again, here we tried to sort of merge like Charlie's rough rock and roll sound with my more synthetic sound edge, which was quite tough to actually pull off. I remember I made many versions of his original Break with my layers and stuff, but this is what we ended up with, and you can hear the snare is very hairy in a way, and you can see here, like compared to my other projects, this is really early set into audio. That was Charlie's Break, or the break of his we processed in our first session. But then I couldn't help myself but to layer in my serum snare to give it some pop down there. Same goes with the kick. Standard procedure as always, sine waves. Little rim shot here, which is quite cool. Something I figured out the other day. If you, layer a little rim shot to sort of almost distort the phase, or almost disturb the phase of your snare a little bit, it will sound more real and original. It's something definitely worth trying. Not to go super synthetic, but trying to get some dirt back into the mix. Kind of counterintuitive, but for some songs it works. And for this specifically, I really didn't want the snare or the kick to stick out and be too obvious electronic and synthetic. So that's why we did that. And I think the drum kit sounds really nice now. Bunch of overheads and samples. Pretty much everything audio here. I think in the main drop I did add a couple of synthetic hi-hats. So you see this day you can make some hi-hats using serum as well, and they do sound quite convincing. And that's sort of the balance we were trying to achieve here. Have a rock-ish almost sounding break, like a classic sounding break. A break, if you will, sort of paired with my sonics. And the overall vibe of the track, as far as I'm concerned, is a bit old school-ish, if you want. It's a very simple structure. We wanted this track to be, like DJ friendly. The whole arrangement is very, very much straightforward. 32 bar intro, little breakout, 3x16. Roll it out, 16 bar breakdown again, another 3x16, little outro. Really, really, DJ friendly and straightforward. This is a track for DJs, and it just showcases a merger of sonics and attitudes, and for its own reason, I'm really happy how it sounds, and I think this specifically is one of the reasons the whole Particles project is the way it is, because for instance, if you compare this track with the track I did with Cameron Crooked or the track I did with Imano, those three tracks are so different, but their own, they have a right to exist on their own and for their own reasons, because they're so different, but they're very different intentionally, and just how it happens when you put 2 or 3 or 4 people together in a room with different approaches of how to make music. And this one with Break is specifically sounding very unique, I think, and but it does its job really, really well, I think, and it got a lot of attitude, and I think it's time to look at the bass section here, because as I was saying earlier, this time around, there's almost no serums in there, there's almost no synths in there. It's pretty much all set into samples. And let's have a look at the reese, which is one of the main elements in the song, you know. It's that guy with a really long reverb tail. And as you can see here, there's always two of the sounds playing. The reason why there's, you know, those pairs and that pair is because this lower layer is always detuned slightly different. So with those old school resounds, you know, you want them to sort of phase out at certain moments, and you've got a 1-bar riff, you try to, you know, detune them by 2, 3, 4 semitones, and that's the nice amount when they really phase out. And, you know, those parameters are different, and that's why we had, you know, different variations here all over the track. The sound itself is pretty much from the original sound source. I do remember we did make this reese in Serum, or we bounced it, and you know, without the plugins, still pretty much the reese that we have. But you know, some of the plugins here, like this UED EQ, I usually use that for vocals, but you see, it really brings out the top end. And with those plugins, with the UED plugins, it's cool because sometimes they clip internally. If you run them too hot into the input, if you run them, you know, very loudly into the input, then they will sort of also distort inside the plugin, and it sometimes sounds really cool. We'll have a look at that later as well with the other sounds in this track. So we got those reese variations here that change every 16, you know. Up, down, up, down. There are 16 different pitch even. And we literally just went in and detuned those sounds here using Cubase internals algorithm. And the thing is with this, you know, naturally I wouldn't do that, or usually I wouldn't do it if it was a track by myself, but with this vibe, the whole charm of this track is, you know, rough, rugged, old school. Not old school, but, you know, rough and rugged and rock and roll. It really works with that, you know, and sometimes you just have to let go of your principles and say, you know what, let's set this into audio and just do it like that, and it really works. So literally, this is just audio. Same here with those transitional little reeses. That's a sound Charlie prepared. I think he bounced it from a virus, from a TI2, and, you know, even without the plugins, same sort of sound. And those stages you see, just a little reverb we can dial in at some stages. So yeah, those were sounds he prepared for the session. Really, really nice. Sound really nicely, really, you know, fall nicely into place with the whole sonic spectrum we got here. Here, I think in the second 16 I did a little variation using Cubase as a sampler. You know, classic old school sort of looping reese sort of trick. So you got the original sample here, and then I set this into audio and dragged it into the sampler. You know, looked for a nice looping point, and then dialed it in when I needed it to. Yeah, a little pitch down. Pretty standard stuff here, but that's actually a pretty neat feature Cubase 10 has now, the internal sampler. You know, usually you would have to have a Contact or any other sampler to be able to do this. Nice and handy, pretty good. So big up Steinberg for including that sampler. So yeah, so much for the read section here. Pretty straightforward. Let's have a look at the other sounds. The next section would be, I call them stabs, which is, you know, this is actually a serum patch here. It actually clicks a little bit. You don't even realize that in the song. Yeah, standard thing. Turns out this is one of the sounds I actually made for one of the Hello World project I did with Emperor years ago, but still relevant, still sounds all right actually. Over here we got a little variation, I think just a little filter. Yeah, just different pitch, different filter, combined with the reese to sort of almost build the riff. So it comes in always at the end bit after the reese. And the second bit is the groove here, is quite essential. And that's actually really funny. If you look at those sounds, again, this is all just samples Charlie brought for the session. If you listen to this sound without any of the processing, it's just a sine wave, literally pitching down. And that's what I meant in the introduction. One way of working on electronic music is synthesize a lot. Use different synthesizers, go very electronica, but still to this day, working with audio is still relevant. It works. And if you know there are plugins, especially if you want to achieve a certain sound, you can really make cool sounds with just using audio. So what I'm trying to say is there's no right or wrong way when it comes to production. Personally, I like being in control. As I said in the tutorial we did about transit, I love being in control about every aspect of the sound until the very last stage. But there's no problem with not being able to do that. If you set your sounds into audio, you can still achieve great sounding textures by using plugins, and it still sounds relevant. So let's have a quick look and maybe dial them in step by step. So clearly the LFO tool here just dictates the groove. Without it, still it's a sine wave. The next plugin is again a UED plugin. It's a Studer tape, and this one really beefs up the sound. You can even hear the noise in there. Okay, turn it off here. I left it in for some reason, probably because I forgot about it. But that actually that noise really does something. I think that's why we left it in. So that guy creates harmonics. He creates overtones. And actually the noise is really, really important. You can hear it now. It sort of sizzles out. Next stage is Isotope's Trash 2. And you can see the sound is starting to take shape. What we did here is we just trashed the top end quite a bit. So you see we went in quite extreme here. There's no character on the bass sound, but it's just like a really ugly wave shaping happening here. After that, we gated the sound a little bit, here we go. Just to really emphasize the groove the LFO tool before was emphasizing, because after the distortion, all the grooves are almost flattened out. But by using the multiband dynamic here, you can still gate the stuff you want to gate and bring back the groove originally. So this is almost there. A little bit of EQing here. Okay, we took out some of the nasty harmonics. Pretty standard stuff. And then another UD plugin, the Pultec EQ, which really gives it some more beef here. Just boosting certain frequencies, like on purpose, running the plugin red. And you see again, that's what I mentioned with the Mark EQ earlier. If you run certain plugins hot, they clip internally, and sometimes that's gives the sound its charm. After that, we limit it with a really weird looking limiter. It's called Limiter 6. And we clip it here. Again, clipping and limitation sometimes is not only good to control the sound, but it's also a creative tool you can use to create harmonics. And in that case, that's what we did, and that's how people did it back then when they made the sort of wormhole era, where you have those really obvious sounding distorted bass sounds. It's pretty much running sine waves red into distortion, limiters, whatever, create harmonic, take out the unnecessary parts. And so it's pretty much subtractive EQing and subtractive sound design. You really make a brick wall of sound by distorting stuff, take some elements out, distorting it again, see which harmonics you like, and so on, until you reach a point where you're really happy with what you hear. That's what we did here, basically. A little bit of EQing, probably, again, emphasizing certain frequencies, and then gating the stuff so that we lose, some unwanted sort of tails. That's the bass. That's the bass sound, and all of those guys here are treated similarly. So you see, I think we just made it once and then doubled the instances to get a similar sounding vibe. What I did here is I did lay a bit of a serum, and you can hear it just makes the sound a bit more warmer. It's more rounder. It just emulates a kick sound, and that's something I pushed into the same bus as this guy here is, and that gives the sound a little bit of a, defined edge, a little bit of a roundness. That's something I did in the very last mixing stage of the project, just to tie it together and make it sound a little bit, tied together. So yeah, that's the bass sounds really. I mean, we can have a look at those guys here, like the answer section, or at least play it from the top one more time. Those guys here again, similar sort of approach. Without that, it's just a little bass fart really. Again, Studer, Trash, and the pull tech really shape the sound. So those are the the key plugins here. Let's have a look at the routing maybe quickly. So all those guys go into this, what's it called? Answer bass group. This is basically just controlling the sound. So this is a sidechain where kick and snare come in. An EQ that is doing nothing. Nice. An isotope EQ here. Yeah, you see a little bit of active EQing to boost certain frequencies. That's just, a really sound shaping in the very last stage of the project. Hang on, I lost the... Here we go. Yeah, and then another EQ, sort of getting rid of frequencies, boosting frequencies, standard mixing stuff. And you see here we got a lot of sound effects again that create textures around those bass sounds. So again, that's very specific to my workflow, but I like doing that a lot. If I mute all those, little guys here, you will see that the bass riff is not as cool. Very dry, isn't it? So if I unmute those guys again, there's a lot of room now. And that's what I meant in my other tutorials. Working with sound effects can be really, really helpful because you still have your fundamental sound that is really controlled and really, beefed, and you have reverbs that are just on the side and are sidechained by the riff itself. And that way, you never really disturb the face of your original sound, which is something I really like. So yeah, in total, those sounds sort of together build the bass riff. And in those 16 bar variations, we just changed the LFO of those knocks. So at the end of the day, it's just a melange of sounds we put together in a sort of groove, and that's a bit of an old school approach. Which is nice though, for some tracks it really works. One more thing to mention maybe is the vocals here, or the sort of out of time vibe. We wanted to do sort of classic, vocal.
Wait a minute.
And then we played around with it in the second drop, where you sort of let him wait, and then. And then you just delay the vocal on the second drop. It's a really cool moment, I think. Yeah, that was pretty cool. And the theme here is just an old pad I think Charlie prepared from the virus. You can still see it here in the description. Sort of a Kemal Conflict detuned sound that opens up towards the drop. And then I just made a counterpart to that and that sound, because that other sound is also a sample, like a sort of weird guitar riff. I think a sample from YouTube. So you see, it's like a weird sort of vibe, fading it in nicely. Compared with that guy, gives it a weird tone. And that's the counterpart I was mentioning earlier. That's something I wanted to write on top of it. That sort of complements the Reese edits we have every 16 bars. So that guy plays those notes the Reese turnaround sounds are playing. So let me play the Reese after this. And you play this. So that are similar keys we used here. And again, just a little serum thing we did. Just to get a little vibe going. And I think, they come nicely together as well. I think the melange of sounds is pretty cool here. Paired with some, risers. Pitched up. Building up. And the breakout.
Wait a minute!
So yeah, this sums it up. This is Mefjus Break, Out of Time. Particles episode 5. How about that? And I hope you enjoyed that walkthrough. Again, if there's any questions, drop me a DM or comment on the video and I'll try to answer those questions. Yo, big up, I'm out.
Wait a minute!